5 seconds in a coffee shop. A stranger's eyes meeting yours. A recognition, so visceral it rewrites everything you thought you knew about desire. But what happens when that stranger is listening to every secret you confess in the dark? When wanting him means destroying the protection keeping you alive. Some attractions are inconvenient. This one is catastrophic. The confession line rang at exactly 2:43 in the morning, which was either very desperate or very drunk, and Reese Calloway had learned to tell the difference within the first 10 seconds. He pressed the button, didn't say anything, never did, that was the whole point. The line was automatic. A number people could call, confess whatever darkness was eating them alive, and hang up believing their secrets dissolved into the void. What they didn't know was that every word was recorded, every confession cataloged, every weakness filed away for the moment it became useful. Reese had been running this operation for 3 years, and in that time he'd collected enough sins to burn down half the city's elite. He usually reviewed the recordings during his twice-weekly sessions, efficient and detached, tagging them by potential value. But tonight was different. Tonight he was in Tokyo closing a deal that would reshape shipping routes across the Pacific, sitting in a hotel room at 4 in the afternoon local time, and he'd still pulled up the live feed because something told him to listen. The voice that came through made him set down his glass. "I need to confess something that makes me a terrible person," she said. Her voice was steady but urgent, like she'd been holding this in for too long. 3 weeks ago, I saw a man in a coffee shop. We didn't speak. We didn't touch. Our eyes met for maybe 5 seconds while I was waiting in line and he was waiting for his order. That's it. 5 seconds. Reese leaned back in his chair. He'd heard confessions about murder, embezzlement, affairs that would topple corporations, and one memorable call about a man who'd been secretly replacing his neighbor's garden gnomes with increasingly larger ones to make him think he was losing his mind. But this felt different. And I haven't stopped thinking about him since, she continued. Reese had handled hostile takeovers with less personal interest. Not in a harmless way, not in a fleeting crush way. I mean, I think about him constantly, when I wake up, when I'm at work, when I'm standing next to my boyfriend at business dinners. I think about what it would feel like if that stranger touched me, if he looked at me again, if he said my name even though he doesn't know my name. She laughed, sharp and bitter. And here's why I'm a terrible person. My boyfriend isn't really my boyfriend. He's my protection. 2 years ago, my father died and left me with a debt to people who don't forgive debts. $4 million stolen from the Kovacs. And my boyfriend stepped in, offered to make me untouchable. All I had to do was play the role, be his girlfriend, stand beside him, look the part. Reese went very still. It's a contract, a business arrangement. He gets the right girlfriend to prove he's stable and ready for bigger things. I get to stay alive. We both know exactly what this is. There's no love, no real relationship, just mutual benefit. Pause. So technically, I'm not cheating. You can't cheat on a contract, but I still feel like I'm breaking some rule I didn't know existed. Because wanting someone else this badly, someone I don't even know, makes me realize how trapped I actually am. Her voice dropped lower. I looked him up, the man from the coffee shop, asked around, very carefully, because if my boyfriend found out I was asking about another man, he'd want to know why. Not out of jealousy, out of concern for his investment. He'd want to make sure I wasn't becoming a liability. She paused. Turns out the coffee shop man is dangerous, not obviously, but powerful in ways that make powerful people nervous. Exactly the kind of man my boyfriend would warn me away from. Exactly the kind of man I should absolutely not be obsessing over. Her voice cracked slightly. And I don't care, I know I should. I know it's insane. But when I think about him, I feel something real. Something that isn't obligation or fear or the performance I give every single day. Pause. I've been in this arrangement for 2 years. 2 years of smiling at dinners. 2 years of holding hands for appearances. 2 years of letting my boyfriend introduce me as his partner like we're building something together when we both know I'm just part of his resume. Her voice turned harsh. And I was fine with it. I accepted it. I played my part perfectly. Until 3 weeks ago when a stranger looked at me for 5 seconds and made me feel more alive than I've felt in 2 years. And now I can't stop thinking about what my life would be like if I'd met him first. If I'd had a choice. If I wasn't bound to someone else by fear and survival. The call ended. Reese sat in his Tokyo hotel room, staring at nothing. 3 weeks ago. Coffee shop. A stranger she'd seen for 5 seconds. Dangerous, powerful in ways that made powerful people nervous. He pulled up his calendar, cross-referenced his schedule. 3 weeks ago, he'd been in the city, had meetings stacked back to back, had stopped at his usual coffee shop near the office because he'd needed caffeine and 20 minutes that weren't about negotiations or territories or men who smiled while discussing murder. He'd been checking his phone, half listening to a voicemail about shipping routes, waiting for his order. And then he'd looked up. She'd been standing 3 people behind him in line, dark hair pulled back, sharp features, dressed like someone who worked in a gallery or a bookstore or somewhere that required looking presentable but not corporate. Their eyes had met. And for 5 seconds, the world had gone quiet. He felt it in his chest, something immediate, something that made him want to put down his phone and ask her name, something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten what it was. His phone had rung, a call he couldn't ignore. He looked away, grabbed his coffee, walked out. But he'd thought about her. That night, lying in bed, he'd replayed those 5 seconds, which was ridiculous. He was a grown man who controlled shipping routes across 3 continents. He didn't moon over strangers in coffee shops like a teenager. Except apparently he did. The next day, he'd caught himself looking for her when he went back to the same coffee shop. The day after that, he'd told himself to stop being ridiculous. He didn't have time for distractions, didn't have room in his life for complications. He'd ordered his coffee without looking at anyone. Very mature, very professional. He'd still checked the line behind him, just in case. He'd forced himself to forget after that. Except he hadn't forgotten. He thought about her at odd moments, wondered who she was, what her voice sounded like, whether she'd felt what he'd felt in those 5 seconds. Whether he was losing his mind over a stranger. And now she was telling him. She felt it too. She'd been thinking about him for 3 weeks. She was trapped in some arrangement with a boyfriend who wasn't really a boyfriend. And she'd looked him up, found out he was dangerous. Reese rewound the recording, listened again. This was either the universe's idea of a gift or a very elaborate joke at his expense. He was leaning toward joke. He pulled up the archives, searched for other calls from the same number. There were 5 more, spanning the last 2 months. He listened to the oldest one first, dated 62 days ago. "I need to confess that I hate my life," she'd said. Simple, direct, no build-up, just straight into the existential crisis. Not all of it, just the part where I have to pretend to be someone's girlfriend when we both know I'm really just his employee. Pause. He's not cruel. He's actually quite considerate within the bounds of what we are. He makes sure I'm comfortable. He doesn't make demands beyond what we agreed to. He treats me well. Her voice had gone flat. But he also treats me like an investment, like something that needs to be maintained. Last week, he reminded me to get my hair done before a dinner, not because he cares how I look, because his colleagues would notice if I didn't look maintained. She laughed bitter. I'm like a luxury car, regular maintenance required. Reese had almost smiled at that, almost. The second call, 6 weeks ago. We had sex last night, she'd said, clinical and detached. It's part of the arrangement, not explicitly stated but understood. We're supposed to look like a real couple, and real couples have sex. Pause. I felt nothing, less than nothing. I performed, made the right sounds. Did what was expected, and he was satisfied because he doesn't actually care if I enjoy it. He just cares that it happens, that the appearance is maintained. Her voice had turned dry. I've gotten very good at faking orgasms. I could probably teach a class at this point. Introduction to Performance Art. Advanced techniques in lying through physical response. I'd make an excellent instructor. Reese had actually laughed at that one, just once, quietly, then felt vaguely guilty about it. The third call, 5 weeks ago. He told someone today that he loves me, she'd said. At a business dinner, in front of his colleagues, very romantic, very convincing. Pause. He doesn't love me, I don't love him. We both know it, but love is part of the image, part of what makes him look stable and ready for responsibility. So he says it, and I smile, and everyone believes it because we're both very good actors. She paused. Sometimes I wonder if we should just skip the middleman and get into actual theater. At least then we'd get applause. The fourth call, 4 weeks ago. I looked up the statute of limitations today, she'd said quietly. For what my father did, turns out I'm legally safe. The Kovacs can't touch me through legal channels anymore. Long pause. But that doesn't matter, because they don't work through legal channels. They work through very polite men in expensive suits who smile while explaining that accidents happen. And my boyfriend's protection is the only thing stopping those very polite men from visiting me. She'd laughed, hollow and tired. So I'm not in a relationship. I'm in a very polite, very civilized hostage situation, with good wine and nice dinners. It's like being kidnapped by someone with excellent taste. Reese had poured himself another drink at that point. The fifth call, 3 weeks ago, was dated the day before she'd seen him in the coffee shop. I'm 28 years old, she'd said, and I've never felt desire, real desire, not the kind you perform for someone's benefit, the kind that actually makes you want someone. Pause. I don't know if I'm capable of it. If 2 years of transactions and performances have broken something in me, if I'll spend the rest of my life feeling nothing while pretending to feel everything. Her voice had cracked. Which is depressing. I'm too young to be this dead inside. I should at least wait until I'm 40 and can blame it on a midlife crisis. And then the next call, the one from 3 weeks ago, after she'd seen him. After those 5 seconds, that had apparently changed everything for both of them. Reese sat back. She was trapped in some protection arrangement, with a boyfriend who treated her like a luxury vehicle that needed regular maintenance. Her father had stolen from the Kovacs. She was trading her freedom for her safety. And she'd seen Reese in a coffee shop and felt something real for the first time in 2 years. He needed to know who she was. He pulled up a new search, started with what he knew. Protection arrangement. Kovacs, father who stole $4 million, died 2 years ago. It took him 40 minutes. Marcus Castellan embezzled $4 million from a development group connected to the Kovac family. Died of a heart attack 2 years ago. One daughter, Ren Castellan, 28, art gallery manager. Currently in a relationship with Thorne Ashford. Reese stared at the screen. Then he laughed. Just once, sharp and disbelieving. Because of course it was Thorne. The universe had looked at this situation and decided that irony was insufficient. It needed to go for full cosmic comedy. Thorne Ashford, golden boy, rising star. The man Reese had spent 5 years carefully molding into his successor. The man who was brilliant and ruthless and completely loyal. The man who'd come to Reese 2 years ago with a proposal. There's a woman, Thorne had said. Ren Castellan. Her father worked with the Kovacs before he died. She's clean, didn't know anything, but they're making noise about her anyway. And, Reese had asked. And I want to help her, offer protection, make it clear she's off limits. Why? Thorne had smiled. Because she's exactly the kind of woman I should be seen with. Smart, connected to the right circles, beautiful, and if I help her now, she'll be grateful, she'll stay. Reese had approved it. Had facilitated the conversation with the Kovacs. Had made it clear that Ren Castellan was under Thorne's protection, and therefore untouchable. Had never asked what the terms were. Had assumed it was clean, professional, mutually beneficial. He'd created this. He'd signed off on the arrangement that trapped her. And now she was confessing her desire for him without knowing he was listening. Without knowing, he was the one who'd approved her very polite, very civilized cage with good wine and nice dinners. Reese poured another whiskey. This was a problem. This was a massive problem he'd helped create. This was also, objectively, the most complicated thing that had happened to him in years, and he'd once had to negotiate a ceasefire between two families who'd been trying to kill each other for 3 generations. This was worse than the ceasefire. He should delete the files, forget he'd ever heard her voice, forget those 5 seconds in the coffee shop. He pulled up the live feed instead, set an alert for any new calls from her number. Because he was lying to himself, which was ironic considering his entire business model was built on other people's truths. He wanted to hear her voice again. Wanted to know if she'd keep calling. Wanted to know what would happen when she realized who he was. Wanted to know if the universe could possibly make this more complicated. Spoiler alert, it could. Over the next 2 weeks, Ren called 9 more times. Reese was in Moscow for the first one, sitting in a restaurant negotiating pipeline rights with men who smiled while discussing murder, and his phone buzzed with the alert. He excused himself, went to the bathroom, pulled up the feed. "I went back to the coffee shop today," her voice said. "Told my boyfriend I had errands, which is true. My errands just happened to include sitting in a coffee shop for 2 hours hopping to see a stranger who probably doesn't remember I exist." Pause. He didn't show up, obviously, because the universe is not that kind, and I sat there drinking overpriced lattes and feeling like a stalker. She sighed. "I've become the kind of person who stakes out coffee shops. This is what my life has come to. I'm 1 step away from making a vision board." Reese had actually smiled at that, while standing in a bathroom in Moscow, listening to a woman confess to stalking him. His life had gotten very strange. The second call came at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday. Reese was awake, reviewing contracts, when the alert pinged. "I found out more about him," she said. "The coffee shop man. Turns out he's not just dangerous. He's the kind of dangerous that shapes cities, that moves power without anyone noticing until it's already moved." Pause. "Which should terrify me, should make me run in the opposite direction, should make me grateful for my very polite, very safe arrangement." Her voice turned dry. "Instead, I'm more attracted to him, which says terrible things about my judgment, and my survival instincts, and possibly my sanity." She laughed. "My therapist would have a field day with this. If I had a therapist, which I don't, because my boyfriend thinks therapy is for people who can't handle their problems privately." Pause. "I'm calling a confession hotline at 3 in the morning. I think privacy has left the building." Reese had actually laughed out loud at that one. Then reminded himself he was listening to someone's genuine crisis. Then laughed again anyway, because it was objectively funny. The third call was shorter, 90 seconds. "I touched myself thinking about him last night," she said quietly. "And it was the first time in 2 years that I felt anything real. The first time pleasure wasn't something I performed for someone else." Pause. "My boyfriend touched me this morning and I felt nothing. And I realized I've been faking everything, every sound, every reaction, for 2 years." Her voice turned wry. "I deserve an Oscar, or at least a local theater award. Best performance in a relationship that is actually a relationship." The fourth call, a week later. "I found his building," she said. "Where he lives, I didn't plan to. I was just researching him online like a normal, well-adjusted person with healthy boundaries." Pause. "That was sarcasm. I'm aware I've crossed several boundaries, possibly into illegal territory, definitely into creepy territory." Reese had leaned forward at that. "And yesterday I went there, just stood across the street, told myself I just wanted to see it. Just wanted to make this fantasy feel more real." He'd remembered that day, had left his building around 2 in the afternoon, Had noticed a woman across the street but thought nothing of it. He came out, she continued, got into a car, and I watched him, and I felt like I was going to throw up because this isn't normal, this isn't healthy, this is textbook obsessive behavior. Her voice cracked, but there was dark humor in it. I'm one step away from building a shrine, with candles, and photos I definitely shouldn't have, and little offerings of coffee because that's where I saw him. Pause. I'm joking, mostly. I haven't built a shrine yet, but I've thought about it, which is concerning. Reese had poured himself a drink at that point. The calls continued, each one pulling her deeper, each one laced with self-awareness and dark humor that made Reese more interested than he had any right to be. Day 10. I dreamed about him last night. We were talking, actually talking. And in the dream, I was charming and witty and not at all like the disaster I am in real life. She laughed. Dream me has much better social skills. Dream me doesn't spend 2 hours in coffee shops hopping to see strangers. Dream me has her life together. Pause. Dream me is a liar. Day 12. My boyfriend introduced me to colleagues today, called me his partner, and I stood there smiling while thinking about another man, while wanting another man, while mentally undressing another man. She paused. I'm going to hell, that's fine. I've accepted it. At least hell will be honest about what it is. Day 14. I'm losing my mind. I know I am. I think about him constantly, every moment, every day. I've memorized the limited information I could find about him online. I know his coffee order. I know what time he usually goes to that coffee shop. Her voice turned dry. I've become a stalker with organizational skills. Very efficient stalking. I should put it on my resume. Reese had laughed so hard at that one, he'd almost choked on his drink. Day 16. I looked up whether it's possible to accidentally run into someone without it being obvious you engineered the encounter. Turns out there are entire forums dedicated to this. The internet is a wonderful and terrible place. She sighed. I didn't join the forums. I have some dignity left. Not much, but some. Day 18. My boyfriend asked me today if something was wrong, if I was unhappy. And I said no. Everything's fine. I'm just tired. Pause. I'm the worst person alive. He's giving me protection, safety, a life where I don't have to look over my shoulder, and I'm repaying him by obsessing over someone else and lying about it. Her voice turned bitter. Although technically he's getting exactly what he paid for, a girlfriend who looks the part, who smiles at dinners, who doesn't embarrass him. The fact that I'm dead inside wasn't part of the contract. Day 20. I had a thought today, a terrible thought. What if I actually met him, the coffee shop man? What if I engineered an encounter and actually spoke to him? Pause. And then I realized I have no idea what I'd say. Hi, I'm the woman who's been stalking you for 3 weeks. I saw you once and haven't stopped thinking about you since. I'm in a fake relationship, but I'm emotionally cheating on it with you. She laughed. There's no version of that conversation that doesn't end with a restraining order. The most recent call, from last night, made Reese realize he was in serious trouble. Tomorrow I meet my boyfriend's mentor, she said. Reese had gone completely still. The man who's been grooming him for something big, something that requires the right girlfriend, the right image, me. Pause. And I'm terrified, because I've been distracted, reckless, and if this mentor is as observant as my boyfriend says, he'll see through me. He'll see that I'm not the perfect, devoted girlfriend. He'll see that I'm trapped and obsessing over someone else. Her voice dropped. But there's this part of me that hopes he does see. That hopes someone finally sees the truth, because I can't keep performing forever. I'm running out of Oscar-worthy material. Long pause. And I keep having this insane thought, this impossible fantasy that my brain won't let go of. She'd laughed, manic and desperate. What if the mentor is him? What if it's the man from the coffee shop? What if I walk into that dinner and it's him? Reese had closed his eyes. It won't be. I know it won't be. The universe is cruel, but it's not that creative. It doesn't do dramatic irony on that scale. Pause. But I can't stop imagining it. Can't stop wondering what his face would look like when he saw me. If he'd remember those 5 seconds. If he felt what I felt. Her voice had gone quiet. Or if he'd just look at me like I'm his protege's girlfriend and nothing more. Which would be worse. Knowing he felt nothing when I'd felt everything. She paused. I'm wearing red tomorrow. My boyfriend suggested black, said it was more appropriate, more professional. But I'm wearing red anyway because if I'm going to meet this mentor and have him evaluate whether I'm good enough for his protege's image, I want to at least feel like myself, even if it's just for one night. The call had ended, and Reese had sat in the dark, caught between laughing and pouring another drink. The universe wasn't just creative. It was a sadist with a sense of humor. Because he had felt it, had thought about her for 3 weeks, had looked for her in that coffee shop. And tomorrow she was walking into his home, bound to his protege by an arrangement Reese had approved, wanting him so badly it was destroying her, about to discover that the universe absolutely did do dramatic irony on that scale. This was a problem. This was a massive problem he'd helped create. He'd handled coups with less existential discomfort. He'd negotiated ceasefires with less personal stake. He'd restructured entire criminal enterprises with less anxiety. This was worse than all of it. The smart move was obvious. Cancel the dinner, delete the files, forget those 5 seconds. Pretend he'd never heard her voice confessing desire and dark humor and self-aware stalking tendencies at 3 in the morning. Reese didn't cancel the dinner. Because apparently he'd lost his mind somewhere between Moscow and that first confession. The next day passed in carefully controlled chaos. He met with Thorne for lunch, reviewed plans, discussed strategy. Tried very hard not to think about the fact that in approximately 6 hours, he'd be face to face with the woman who'd been stalking him for 3 weeks. Who thought she was walking into an evaluation. Who had no idea she was walking into the punchline of the universe's favorite joke. Thorne talked about Wren with professional satisfaction. She's perfect for this, he said, cutting into something that cost more than most people's weekly salary and tasted like disappointment. Smart enough to keep up, connected enough to add value, beautiful enough to make the right impression. You sound like you're describing a hire, Reese said. In a way, I am, Thorne smiled. She knows what this is. We both do. It's mutually beneficial. I provide protection and stability. She provides presence and legitimacy. It works. And she's happy with the arrangement. She's alive because of it. Thorne said it like it was obvious, like it was enough. That's more than she would be otherwise. Reese wanted to ask if Thorne had ever considered what she wanted beyond survival. Wanted to ask if he'd noticed she was dead inside. Wanted to ask if he'd ever actually looked at her. He didn't, because he already knew the answers. And because he was about to do something very stupid that would probably destroy everything he'd built with Thorne. That night, the line rang at 2:53. Tonight's the dinner, Wren said. Her voice was different, calmer, like she'd accepted her fate. I'm wearing red. My boyfriend suggested black, said it was more appropriate, more professional, but I'm wearing red anyway. Pause. Because if I'm going to keep performing, I at least want one thing that's mine, even if it's just a dress color, even if it's petty, even if it changes nothing. She was quiet for a long moment. I keep thinking about the man from the coffee shop, wondering where he is, what he's doing, if he ever thinks about anything other than being dangerous and powerful and making powerful people nervous. Her voice cracked, but there was dry humor in it. He doesn't think about me. I know this. I've accepted this. But I pretend anyway because pretending is literally all I have at this point. Pause. Maybe the mentor will be nice. Maybe he'll look at me and see a person instead of a strategic asset. Maybe he'll understand that I'm dying slowly in this arrangement and need someone to acknowledge it. She laughed hollow. Or maybe he'll be exactly like my boyfriend. All calculation, all strategy, all business, and I'll spend another 2 years slowly suffocating while everyone tells me how lucky I am." The call ended. Reese stood by his window, looking out at the city. He should cancel this dinner. He should delete every recording. He should forget those 5 seconds ever happened. He poured a drink instead and waited for the universe to complete its joke. The doorbell rang at 7:30 exactly. Reese took a breath, straightened his tie, opened the door. And there she was. Thorne stood there, perfect as always, tailored suit, confident smile, completely oblivious. And beside him was Wren. She was wearing red. The dress was beautiful and bold and completely wrong for the kind of dinner Thorne had probably told her this was. Her dark hair was pulled back, same sharp features he remembered, same eyes that looked like they were cataloging everything. She looked up. Their eyes met. And Reese watched in real time as her brain processed what was happening. Recognition. The coffee shop. The stranger. The man she'd been stalking for 3 weeks. The man she'd confessed everything to. The man she'd been touching herself thinking about. Was standing in front of her. In a very expensive suit. In a very expensive penthouse. As her boyfriend's mentor. Her face went through approximately 7 different expressions in 3 seconds. Shock, disbelief, horror, more horror, brief flash of hope, more horror, resignation that the universe was personally victimizing her. It was the most emotion Reese had seen on anyone's face in years. Thorne didn't notice. Of course he didn't notice. He was already stepping inside, talking about traffic, completely oblivious to the fact that his girlfriend was currently experiencing a psychological crisis of epic proportions. "Reese," Thorne said warmly, turning back, "this is Wren." Wren extended her hand mechanically. Like a robot whose programming had just encountered a fatal error, but was still trying to complete basic functions. Reese took it. Her fingers were ice cold and trembling. "It's nice to finally meet you," she said. Her voice was exactly the same. The voice he'd been listening to for 3 weeks. The voice that had confessed desire and desperation and stalking tendencies and dark humor at 3 in the morning. The voice that had said, "I'm 1 step away from building a shrine." "Likewise," Reese said quietly. He held her eyes for 1 second longer than necessary. Just long enough for her to see it. He knew. He knew who she was. He knew what she'd been doing. He knew everything. Her eyes went wider. The color drained from her face. She looked like she might faint, or run, or possibly both. Thorne turned, expectant, and they both rearranged their faces into something appropriate. Wren's expression settled into polite interest. Reese's settled into professional courtesy. They were both very good actors. "Come in," Reese said. Wren walked past him into the apartment. He caught the faintest whisper as she passed. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." Yes, Reese thought, closing the door behind them. The universe, absolutely, did dramatic irony on this scale. And it had a terrible sense of humor. Dinner was going to be a disaster. Reese had known this the moment Wren walked through his door, looking like the universe had personally offended her. What he hadn't anticipated was how spectacularly awkward it would be. They were seated at his dining table. Thorne at one end, perfectly comfortable, talking about market projections like a man who had no idea his girlfriend was currently experiencing a full psychological breakdown in slow motion. Wren sat to Reese's right, her face carefully blank in a way that probably looked calm to Thorne, but read as barely controlled panic to anyone actually paying attention. Reese was paying attention. He'd been paying attention for 3 weeks. The first course arrived, something small and decorative that required a manual to identify. "This is excellent, Reese," Thorne said. "Where did you find this caterer?" "Referral from a colleague," Reese said. He watched Wren stare at her plate like it might contain answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. She hadn't looked at him directly since that initial moment of recognition at the door. Was very carefully keeping her eyes on either Thorn or her food or the very interesting wallpaper to her left. Ren works at a gallery, Thorn said, pivoting smoothly into introduction mode. The Castellan on Fifth. She manages their contemporary collection. Contemporary art, Reese said, looking at her. She finally met his eyes. Held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds before looking away. Yes, she said. Her voice was steady. Impressively steady considering she looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Mostly emerging artists, some established names. Do you enjoy it? Reese asked. It was a normal question, a polite question, the kind of thing you asked at dinners like this. Ren looked at him again. Something flickered in her eyes, like she was trying to figure out if he was genuinely asking or just being polite. Yes, she said carefully. It's one of the few things I actually get to choose. Thorn laughed, completely missed the edge in her voice. Ren's being modest. She's excellent at what she does. Reese watched her withdraw slightly at the compliment. Like praise from Thorn was something to endure rather than enjoy. The second course arrived. Fish, actually recognizable this time, still tiny. Thorn shifted forward slightly. I wanted to mention something. There's an opportunity in Istanbul, expansion into Eastern Europe. It would require some travel over the next few months. Sounds promising, Reese said. It is, and Ren would come along, of course. Thorn said it casually, like it was already decided. These things work better with the right partner. Ren's hand tightened on her fork. Reese noticed. I haven't mentioned the specifics yet, Thorn continued, still talking to Reese, but it's exactly the kind of move we've been building toward. Good visibility, good connections. Ren set down her fork very carefully. When would this be? She asked quietly. Starting next month, probably 3 trips over the quarter, week-long each time. Thorn glanced at her. You can manage the time away from the gallery, can't you? It wasn't really a question. I'll make it work, Ren said. Her voice was perfectly even. Her knuckles were white. Reese opened his mouth. Stopped. Thorn was still talking. The first trip would be mid-February. There's a conference, some dinners with potential partners, the usual networking. Ren nodded, said nothing. Reese felt something tighten in his chest, the urge to interrupt, to ask if she wanted to go, to ask if Thorn had even considered that she might have her own plans. He didn't, because intervening would reveal too much, would show Thorn that Reese cared about Ren's answer in a way that had nothing to do with professional courtesy. Would show Ren that he'd noticed. So he sat there, watched her perform agreement, watched Thorn assume consent, and said nothing. It felt like swallowing glass. Reese, Thorn was looking at him, you were saying something. Reese realized he'd started to speak and stopped mid-breath. Just that Istanbul can be complicated, he said smoothly. Politically, you'll want to be careful with the local partnerships. Thorn nodded, accepting the redirect. Exactly why I want to get the groundwork right. The conversation moved on. Reese didn't. He kept replaying the moment, the way Ren had tensed, the way she'd forced herself to agree, the way Thorn hadn't even noticed he was telling her instead of asking her. The way Reese had almost said something and hadn't. Coward, he thought. The rest of dinner passed in carefully maintained politeness. Thorn talked business. Reese responded appropriately. Ren barely spoke. But Reese noticed things. Noticed she stopped eating after the Istanbul conversation. Noticed the way she twisted her napkin under the table when Thorn talked about their future. Noticed the way she stared at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, like she was trying to reconcile the stranger from the coffee shop with the man sitting across from her now. Like she couldn't decide if he was safe or dangerous. He was neither. He was worse. Coffee arrived, real coffee, strong and black. Ren took hers with nothing added, drank it like she needed it to survive. Thorn took his with cream and sugar. Reese drank his black. Ren noticed. Her eyes flicked between her cup and his. Black, no sugar, efficient. Just like in the coffee shop 3 weeks ago. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down her cup. Thorne checked his watch. We should probably head out, early meeting tomorrow. Of course, Rhys said. They stood, moved toward the door. Thorne shook Rhys's hand. Thank you for dinner. This was important. Anytime, Rhys said. Then he turned to Ren. Extended his hand. She looked at it for a fraction of a second too long. Then took it. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling. It was nice to meet you, she said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were chaos. Rhys held her hand. 3 seconds. 4. 5. He felt her pulse racing under his thumb. Felt the slight tremor in her fingers. Felt the way she wasn't pulling away, even though she should. 6 seconds. 7. Thorne shifted slightly, noticing. Rhys let go. Stepped back. Likewise, he said quietly. Ren's breath caught, so quietly most people wouldn't have heard it. Rhys heard it. Thorne had noticed too, was looking between them with something new in his expression, not suspicion exactly, but awareness. Ready, Thorne said to Ren. She nodded, didn't look at Rhys again. They left. The door closed. Rhys stood in his empty penthouse, knowing he'd just made a terrible mistake. He'd held her hand too long. He looked at her in a way that made it clear this wasn't just professional courtesy. Thorne had noticed. And Rhys had done it anyway. Because apparently self-control had limits, and his limit was watching Ren Castellan walk out of his apartment without knowing he saw her. His phone rang 20 minutes later. Thorne. Rhys answered. Quick question, Thorne said. His voice was casual, too casual. Did something happen tonight that I should know about? What do you mean? With Ren, you seemed interested. Interested, Rhys repeated. In her answer, her opinion, Thorne paused. The handshake was long, Rhys. Rhys said nothing. So I'm asking, Thorne continued, as someone who values your guidance, was I missing something? Is there something about Ren I should be concerned about? The question was careful, strategic. Thorne asking for professional feedback while really asking something else entirely. She seemed uncomfortable with Istanbul, Rhys said. She'll adjust, she always does. Does she, or does she just stop arguing? Silence. What are you really asking me? Thorne said finally. I'm not asking anything, I'm observing. Observing what? That you told her about Istanbul instead of asking her. That you assumed she'd go. That when she hesitated, you didn't notice. I noticed, Thorne said coolly. I also know that Ren understands how this works. We have an arrangement, a mutually beneficial one that you approved 2 years ago. I approved protection in exchange for presence, Rhys said. I didn't approve you making decisions for her without asking. She has input. Does she, or does she have the option to agree with what you've already decided? The silence that followed was arctic. I see, Thorne said finally. And your interest in my girlfriend's level of input is purely professional. There it was, the real question. Yes, Rhys lied. Good, because for a moment there it seemed personal. Thorne's voice was pleasant, dangerous. The handshake, the questions, the way you looked at her. I was being polite. You were being something, Thorne said. I'm just not sure what. Rhys said nothing. Ren is important to me, Thorne continued. Not just as a partner, as part of my future, the future you've been helping me build. I need to know if that's still something you support. It is, Rhys said. Another lie. Good, then we understand each other. Thorne paused. I'll see you next week. We can discuss the succession timeline then. He hung up. Rhys sat in the dark, knowing he'd just fractured something important. Knowing Thorne was now paying attention in all the wrong ways. Knowing he should have kept his distance and hadn't. His phone buzzed 2 hours later. 3:41 in the morning. The confession line. He pulled up the feed. "I need to confess something I didn't expect," Ren's voice said. She sounded different, raw. "Tonight I met him, the man from the coffee shop, the stranger I've been obsessing over for 3 weeks." Reese leaned forward. "He's my boyfriend's mentor, the man whose approval made the arrangement possible 2 years ago, the man who probably signed off on the whole thing like it was just another business deal." Pause. "And I spent 3 hours trying not to stare at him, trying not to notice things I shouldn't be noticing." Her voice dropped. "Like his hands, I watched him hold his coffee cup and I couldn't stop thinking about what those hands would feel like, which is insane, which makes me sound like a complete pervert, but I noticed." She was quiet for a moment. "And when we shook hands at the end of the night, he held on too long, and I felt it everywhere, not just in my hand, everywhere. My chest got tight, my face got hot, I couldn't breathe properly." Pause. "And I'm ashamed that I reacted like that. Ashamed that a handshake made me feel more than 2 years of my boyfriend touching me. Ashamed that I went home and I could still feel where his thumb had pressed against my wrist." Her voice cracked slightly. "My boyfriend asked me questions in the car, asked if the dinner was okay, if his mentor had made me comfortable, and I lied, said everything was fine, while I was still thinking about another man's hands." Long pause. "But here's what's worse. It wasn't just physical. It was the way he almost said something during dinner." She took a shaky breath. "My boyfriend told him about Istanbul tonight, about this trip he's decided I'm taking, and I sat there feeling my chest get tight because I don't want to go. I don't want to spend weeks networking and smiling and playing the supportive partner." Pause. "And I almost said something, almost told the truth right there at the table, but I didn't because I'm a coward." Her voice went quieter. "But for a second, I thought he was going to say something. The mentor, I saw him notice, saw him start to speak, saw something cross his face like he wanted to ask if I was okay with this." She laughed, bitter and tired. "And then he didn't. He stopped himself, let the moment pass, let my boyfriend keep talking like my agreement was assumed." Pause. "And I don't know if I'm relieved or devastated, because part of me wanted him to ask, wanted someone to finally notice that I never get asked, that I just get told and expected to smile." Long silence. "But maybe it's better he didn't, because wanting him to notice makes everything worse, wanting his attention, wanting him to see me, wanting." She stopped. "God, I noticed how tall he is, how he stands, the way his voice sounds. I noticed that he takes his coffee black like I do. I noticed that when he walked past me to get the door, I could smell whatever cologne he wears and my brain just stopped working for a second." Her voice filled with something close to panic. "These are things I shouldn't be noticing, things I have no right to notice. He's my boyfriend's mentor. He's the man who approved the arrangement that's keeping me alive. And I'm sitting here at 4 in the morning confessing that I can't stop thinking about his hands, about the way he looked at me, about what it felt like when he touched me." Pause. "Even just a handshake, even just 7 seconds of his hand holding mine, and I felt more in those 7 seconds than I've felt in 2 years." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And when we left, I realized something terrible. He almost helped me tonight. He almost stepped in. I saw it. And then he didn't. He let it go, let me go." Long silence. "And I think that's what hurts most. Knowing he saw me drowning. Knowing he chose not to help. Knowing that even someone who noticed still didn't think I was worth the complication." She paused. "Or maybe he just didn't feel anything. Maybe the handshake was nothing to him. Maybe I'm reading meaning into politeness because I'm desperate and pathetic, and so starved for attention that 7 seconds of human contact made me come home and fall apart." Her voice cracked completely. "I don't know which is worse, that he didn't care enough to help, or that he didn't feel anything while I felt everything." The call ended. Reese sat in the dark. She noticed his hands, had noticed his height, his voice, the way he moved, had felt the handshake everywhere, had gone home thinking about him while lying next to Thorne. She thought his silence was indifference, thought he hadn't felt anything. She had no idea he'd stopped himself from intervening because helping her would reveal too much. Had no idea he'd been listening to her beg for someone to see her every night at 3 a.m. Had no idea that holding her hand for 7 seconds had taken every ounce of control he had not to pull her closer. She thought he'd felt nothing. He felt everything. And couldn't tell her. Couldn't explain that his restraint wasn't indifference. It was self-preservation failing in real time. Reese poured another drink. Listened to her confession 3 more times. Heard the shame in her voice when she admitted noticing his hands. Heard the confusion when she described her body's response to a simple handshake. Heard the hurt when she said, "Even someone who noticed still didn't think I was worth the complication." He'd handled hostile takeovers with less personal cost. He'd negotiated ceasefires with less collateral damage. This was worse than all of it, because he couldn't fix it without destroying everything. Couldn't tell her he'd almost intervened without explaining why he'd been paying that much attention. Couldn't tell her he'd felt the handshake too, without revealing he'd been listening to every confession she'd made for 3 weeks. Reese sat in his penthouse at 4 a.m, surrounded by the wreckage of his carefully constructed plans, and did nothing. Again, because some mistakes you make in 7 seconds, and some take 3 weeks of listening before you realize you've already made them. If you're captivated by stories of forbidden attraction, moral complexity, and the dangerous space between desire and destruction, follow for more psychological romance that doesn't apologize for the mess it creates. Drop a comment. Would you want someone to intervene if they knew you were trapped? Or are some rescues more dangerous than the cage?